אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. ויבנה אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאיך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמעך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני, המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
אמן.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בך בנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah.
Amen.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to quickly go through the Mishnah Brura. And we're learning how much must one drink to be obligated in an after brocha. And this is in the Mishnah Brura, section 190, subsection 11, and in the Shulchan Aruch 190, subsection 3. All right. So this is what we're learning. There's a question regarding at what point one is obligated in an after brocha on liquids, specifically on liquids, okay? On the one hand, we learn that one is obligated to make an after brocha on food if one ate a kazayat, which is about 27 ccms. It's about the size of a regular matchbox, I think you can call it that. On the other hand, we found that the classic measurement regarding liquids is different. It's known as a revi'i, which is a measurement from the days of the Talmud. It's basically about 86 milliliters, which is about 3 matchboxes. So obviously, guys, this presents a problem. Why? Because if one drinks more than a kazayat, but less than a revi, for example, 50 milliliters. And also what happens if you, so the solution is either you drink very little or you drink a lot. Because what happens is we have to fulfill the obligation for the minimum requirement of saying it for food versus the minimum for water. So the problem it seems to present here is it's 1 matchbox for food and it's 3 matchboxes for water. Think of it like that in terms of quantity. So if you're hitting 2, it creates a bit of a question. So you either have to have less than a matchbox or more than 3 in order that there aren't different halachic opinions. All right. So due to this uncertainty, one should either drink less than a kazayat, which is like 27 milliliters, and then one definitely is not obligated in an after brocha, or one should drink more than a revi, which is more than 86 moles, which is 3 matchboxes, more than 3, and then one definitely would be obligated in the after brocha. So this is all good when one can choose how much one must drink. But when it comes to all the mitzvahs done with a cup of wine, there is a rule. And that rule is simple. One has to drink at least a cheekful, otherwise known as a Malay lugmav. So this will depend on the person who is drinking. If he has big cheeks like a chipmunk, it will require more. The average person's cheek holds at least 45 millimeters. My cheek, I think, holds enough just to stick contact lenses. But be that as it may, you need enough to cover your cheek. But so this is also another a case of uncertainty, because then more than a kazayat and less than a revi, one may not be required to make an after brocha. So basically, to avoid this, one should make sure that they drink more than a revi and not just a cheekful. Okay? So for example, when you have to make kiddush or havdalah or bench and a cup of wine at the end of the meal, or shiva brochas, etc., you should be careful to drink more than a revi, more than 86 mils, so that it will have a definite obligation in the after brocha. So we'll discuss whether one can share the amount required to drink with others who are part of the mitzvah. Now, I'll tell you why that's very, very important. Say a person suffers from diabetes. The last thing that you want to do is give them enough grape juice to send their body into some sort of hyperglycemic shock by having this extreme spike of blood sugar. So that has to be taken into account. And if somebody battles with alcohol, that's another reason. So finding out if you can share that quantity, I think does have a certain amount of relevance. Okay, so that we'll hit next time. Now, let's just go to the daf and discuss some of the finer points from yesterday. So the thing of it is sometimes I get feedback from different people in the shir occasionally where certain people say, listen, I don't understand. You haven't covered it thoroughly enough. And other people that say, well, you hammer the point to death. So it's very difficult when you've got a spectrum of people that certain people do prepare, certain people don't, certain people hop quickly, certain people don't. So what I've been doing as a pace is I've been looking at how Rabbi Aran Cohen gives over that particular daf and what he emphasizes and what he doesn't, and the examples he uses, because if I can mimic him as best as possible, then it's very likely that I'll probably be on the right track. Does that make sense? Because if I rely on my own instinct or lack of experience, it's certainly not going to be as proficient as if I mimic Rabbi Khan's pace and tone and where he puts emphasis on. So it's still a work in progress, but I'm going to do my best to help you guys. So if we look under 22b2, the Gemara challenges Reish Lakish from a different source. Come learn a proof from the following Mishnah. If one sets ablaze through a deaf, mute, a mentally deranged person or a minor, he is not liable to pay under the laws of man, but he is liable to pay under the laws of heaven. So this was very clear that if you give your fire to anybody that has no dias, which means what's dias? Dias means that they cannot see the consequence of action. You have no business giving them a fire. And although you cannot be obligated under the laws of man, Hashem will know your level of responsibility and you're not going to get away with it. Now, basically, there's a difference between why you're not responsible according to, I'm going to test you guys now. Let's just see how much you actually did have from yesterday. Marco.
No. You can't ask me. I was asking a question, but we had to clarify a few things. So unfair.
No, I understand.
I can ask me.
Okay. Quite clearly, is that on whose opinion are we not liable? If you look at it on face value, and why? Under Reish Lakish or Rav Yochanan, and why?
Well, it's definitely Lakish, or his name is.
No. You have to use the respectful term for that. Reish Lakish or Rav Yochanan.
Reish Lakish. But I can't remember names, honestly. I can just remember arguments. I can't remember the arguments, but these are the kind of things that I'm... what's the question? Sorry.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, according to whose opinion and why, Marco, are you not responsible for handing over a fire? In other words, if you set ablaze through a deaf, mute, a mentally deranged person or a minor, why are you not responsible? And according to whose opinion is it, and why?
Well,
we know you're not responsible.
Look, the way I think about this, and this is what I wanted to speak to you about, and that's why you shouldn't be asking these questions now, because I was unclear about a few things yesterday. But
that's why we're having this conversation.
If you handing this, I mean, why would you hand over fire to a deaf mute? So I'm trying to think of a practical example. So I'm thinking, well, let's think of it as a torch in those days, like a thing that's, you hand it. The guy is grappling around in the dock. He's a mate of yours, but he's a deaf mute. All right, you're handing over a torch to let him see his way around, and then all of a sudden, without your attention, he decides that he's going to burn the place down. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I imagine your intention wasn't. You got to know who you're dealing with, right? So normally anybody, even I think a deaf mute would not self-destruct, or I don't know, or do something unless
on your question. I thought about your question, and there are a couple of final points which I just want to go through very quickly.
But I'm not finished.
Point is
Yeah.
Okay, but you asked me 3 questions. You can ask another 3 questions. Can I answer your 3 questions first?
Okay. Yeah.
So to answer your question, the famous line in Texas before they put away a guy for statutory rape is, "She looked 18." Okay? And I'm using this as a statement. This is not a Haredi shir, because often what happens, like in a case of Israel, that we cited two examples yesterday. I don't have the experience that Arthur has with his son who has got certain special needs. So Arthur is so sensitive, he can see any bodily inflection and know that
Correct.
the guy has got slight problems. I don't have children. So when a
No.
person speaks a different language and behaves in a certain way, I missed that nuance twice. And
Yeah.
therefore, I could have done something where if I realized that the person had limited capacity, I wouldn't have taken their objectionable behavior in such a serious manner. Just
Yeah.
like I could have given my flame to somebody that spoke Hebrew, that was an Israeli, that said he wants a lighter and he looks like he's jacking a cigarette and he doesn't
Right.
have all his oars in the water and decides to
Right.
light a haystack. So when it says under the laws of heaven, you will be obligated, it means only Hashem understands your capacity to have investigated very
Yes.
well who you were giving the fire to and
Right.
your level of
Right.
understanding in terms of their competence.
Yeah.
Um, that's
Makes sense.
that's number one. Number two, the cases in the Gemara are to a certain extent artificial or manufactured to teach the points of Rash Lakish and Rav Yochanan, and more than an actual case, as Rabbi Cohen explained, to show how it would play out. So
Yeah.
we've, do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So you've got to
Yes.
keep that in
Yes.
mind.
Yes.
Okay. So what was your other question?
So, uh, okay. So that's a very good answer. So, no, so obviously, yes, it makes total sense. But you say, okay, so you're saying the general rule is without your sensitivity and knowledge about what the person is capable of, you're not liable. But obviously, that's up to Hashem in terms of his own judgments, Hashem's judgments about you. But you're not liable in this. You're not liable for any damages in this particular scenario. Now imagine that.
Okay.
Now imagine there's an objection to this as usual,
Okay.
and that's probably Rav Lochesh. Am I right?
Well, I still don't know why we're not liable, and according to his opinion, I needed you to answer that, but I'm still listening to your question.
No,
No, we
that's
answered
that's
twice.
that's as far as I've got. So maybe other guys can help me out. So if that
Okay,
sounds
so
like a
where's
person,
Arthur
that sounds
disappeared?
like a plausible rule, unless one of the rabbis are objecting to this. Is that are we on the same page?
We're on the same page. Arthur, why
Okay.
does your screen but keep disappearing and appearing? Are you
Because when people come in here, they don't want to be on camera, so I block it and then I put it back on. And then
okay? All right, fair enough. All right. So listen, does anybody know whose opinion when who in follow one set of blows through a deaf mute to mentally ill responsible?
that
So
is,
Yeah,
say that again. We
you're
lost
cracking.
you.
We lost you. Just say the question again.
Okay. If one set ablaze through a deaf mute, a mentally deranged person, or a minor, he's not liable to pay under the laws of man. Uh, Under whose opinion and why?
I-
Can
I'll
anybody
give it to
answer?
you.
Please.
Yeah, I'll give you the answer. So under Reish Lochich, can't pronounce it correctly either. It's your own property. So if it's your own property, the fire, then there's no then you're
It's
not
the opposite.
responsible.
It's the opposite. No, Gav.
The opposite. Yeah.
It's the
Then you are
opposite.
responsible.
Yes, because
Then
if
It's
I've got a
property.
fire, just
Yeah. Sorry, no,
Gavin?
I'm busy.
Yeah.
I'm busy thinking as I'm talking as well. I'm also changing my mind. I agree with you.
Okay, so
with
Gavin,
Reish
get the right.
Lochich, it's your own property. So because it's your own property, you're responsible.
Correct.
With
And therefore,
with
Rav Yochanan.
therefore, with Rabbi Yochanan, you're not liable because the guy's incompetent and it's his own fire. It's his own. What do you call it when you said it gets
Dust.
carried with that? It gets carried with the
Arrows.
with the arrows. That's right, the arrows.
Excellent, excellent. So that's exactly it.
So
According to
explain the
Reish
sorry.
Lakish,
Yes, yes.
according to Reish Lakish, it's my fire. So if anybody does anything with my fire, I'm responsible. It's my property. Why was I giving it to the person? Okay. According to Rav Yochanan, who set the blaze? Whoever set the blaze, it's deemed their direct force.
But they're on your
Does that
property.
make sense?
Yeah, it's a bit
No,
unfair
no.
though, because that person's incompetent. I'm just saying it's a bit unfair.
No, Gav, you just hang on a second. You're responsible under the laws of heaven, meaning that Hashem understands your level of culpability. You get away with nothing. You get away with nothing. It might look like you get away with something in this world. Believe me. Arth, are you okay?
I'm exhausted. I'm hard to keep awake.
So what I was going to say, Gav, is you get away with nothing. Hashem says under the laws of heaven, he will hold you responsible. We're talking about what you can convict somebody with. So according to one who deems that a fire is his arrows, meaning the one who sets the blaze is responsible. If they're deemed mentally incompetent or have no dias because they're minor and consequence of action, they're not held liable. And the person whose fire it is would seem so far in the Gomorrah not to be held liable because it's the error of the person that caused the flame. We're going to learn at the end of the daf, which we did teach yesterday, that Rav Yochanan actually sees it as both. It's both a person's property and a person's arrows. It's not just a person's arrows. We saw
Sorry,
that
James,
at the end of the daf.
So,
Yeah,
James,
we
can I
touched
ask a question? Can I ask a question
Yes.
just about this answer from Gavin? Okay, so it's your property, okay, and you give it to somebody. We established that if he does something, initially it's not your fault because okay, but now we establish it is because it's on your property, right? But if it's on your property, and I mean, and it damages, I don't get it. Sorry.
Okay, you're mixing up you're convoluting two different cases in the stuff. The one case is when the blaze starts in your property and goes to your neighbors. I'm going to address this now. What we're talking about here is the fire is your property, like your ox is your property and your pit. So they're two separate issues. So all I want to tell you before we go on, and I want to go on rather quickly, is that we're going to find that Gavin is completely correct, is that Reish Lakish holds one liable as though fire is his property and it's his obligation to look after his property. Just like Gavin is right, that if a person's ox does damage, then he's responsible under the laws of Keren, Shane or Regal for his ox that did damage, and so to fire being your property, you liable. Okay, Gavin, you're completely correct. It's your property. Rav Yochanan said it's deemed your arrows, and therefore if you set things ablaze, then you are responsible because you set the process in motion. We're going to come to learn, which we'd hit in the yesterday's share, that Rav Yochanan, in addition, we haven't gotten there yet in this part of the discussion I'm having with you, that Rav Yochanan obligates somebody for their fire based on the fact that it's deemed A, his arrows, and B, his property, and it's his obligation to look after the property. And I'm going to explain how this plays out now. So, Gavin, well done. But all right. All right. So let me just let me just explain to you how long have we got? We've got 20 minutes. I'm going to fly through this, and this will be quite clear. All right. So let me just give you the bottom lines. Is okay. So we say under what case? Just give me 1 second. All right. So basically, they are obligated if that person, if you want to say, that why does Rav Yochanan, now we've got a difficult question. Under Rav Yochanan, how do we say that the person is not obligated? Because the deaf mute created the fire. The deaf mute, the mentally incompetent person, and the minor caused the fire. So we can say that both of them say that this individual is not obligated simply because they don't have the mental capacity. Let's say that. But why is the person that gave them the flame not obligated? Is because we learned the case that let me just put it to you like this. If we look at the case where there was a bull, if you gave a bull or a pit to look after to somebody mentally incompetent, the person is liable. Why are they not liable in the case of a fire?
Because you don't know I don't think you know the potential consequences. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, so very simple. We learned in the daf previously that a bull that's tied up is looking to get loose all the time, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes an active damager. Okay, a pit that has a manhole to cover it for a sewerage, that the car's vibrations or the horse's vibrations are going to lift the lid off, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes an active pit. So you can't give it to somebody mentally incompetent and expect them to come up with a solution, because it's drama waiting to happen. When you give somebody mentally incompetent a piece of coal, because that coal is not active to create a flame, you have to blow on it and fan it and put flammable material in order to create an active flame. That's why it refers to the Gemara is, if one set ablaze through a deaf, mute, a mentally deranged person or a minor, it doesn't say he gave him an open flame. It said there was a fire as a result, because what we're talking about here is a coal in a box. So say a guy comes to you, a kid comes and I'm friendly with Arthur, I'm friendly with Gavin, and Gavin's got a son that's 12 and a half, heading towards 13, and he's a mature kid. And he said, listen, my dad needs, he's run out of stuff for his bra. Can you give me a piece of coal? And I give him a coal because I know Gavin, and his son seems reasonable. But maybe he's 1 week shy of his 13th birthday, so he can't be tried as an adult. And he gives his dad a coal, but a piece breaks off, and he plays around with it or whatever, and it gets out of hand. In that particular case, I thought I was handing it to somebody that's competent. So what it turns out here is that I'm not responsible because his son fanned it into a flame and an active fire. So the case is that you are liable if you give an active flame over, because an active flame, according to Reish Lakish, is my property that I'm handing over, and it's drama looking to happen. It's like an ox that's tied or a pit that's covered. It's just a matter of time. It's different to a coal in a box that would need to be actively flamed. Okay, that's according to Reish Lakish. According to Rav Yochanan, who said it's the person's responsibility that causes the blaze, why am I responsible as the person that handed them even an active flame? I shouldn't be responsible because they set the fire. So the reality is, even Rav Yochanan would say I'm responsible if I actually gave them the flammable materials, like the wood chips and all sorts of other things, to almost make it an inevitable probability. Right, now that issue is dealt with, there are two supporting verses for Rav Yochanan. The first one that we see is from Exodus, Shmot, chapter 22, verse 5, which reads, if a fire shall go forth and find thorns in a grain stack shall be consumed, or the standing crop or the field, the one who kindles the blaze shall surely repay. So that's a proof for Rav Yochanan that whoever set alight the blaze is financially responsible for the damage. Okay? And then there's a brisa that also supports it, and this was brought by Rava. And the brisa scripture opens with, the damages inflicted by his property includes with the damages inflicted by the person himself, to teach you that one is liable for his fire on account of being deemed his arrows. All right, so there's a question that comes out of here. that Rava said a buyer had the following difficulty. According to the one who says that one is liable for his errors on account for fire on account of it being his errors, how do you find the merciful one in the Torah attempts to um, basically exempt the person from hidden things? So this is what it's saying. We learned before that Rav Yochanan said that you're not responsible, that you are responsible for even hidden things in a haystack. And all the rabbis say there's an exemption. You know, everything has an exemption in the laws of damages. A fire's particular exemption, if things were hidden in a haystack and burnt in a fire, you're not obligated for that. Because a person can claim his Picasso was in that hidden haystack, and therefore you have owned for that Picasso, which is not the fact. If something is obviously concealed, you're not responsible for that. You're only responsible for paying for exposed things. So why does Rav Yochanan say you exempt? You're not exempt for hidden things like the rest of the rabbis, because he deems the fire to be a person's arrows, meaning the person's own force. So you're never exempt for things for damage you caused yourself. All right. What does this mean? We learned a case where if there's maveh or man causing damage, there's no such thing as tzoros or half payment damages or exemption. If somebody uses his own force and A hits B, you're liable. Does that make sense? So for direct damage, there's no exemption. If there's a haystack there, Marco, and I set the
Yeah.
haystack light, I'm responsible. I'm
And for
responsible
hidden
because it's direct damage.
and for hidden things.
Yes, even for hidden things. If you see
Right.
me lighting a Gavin, say you've got some items in your car, right? Gav?
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Say you've got items in your car and you see me set to light your car. Yes or no? Am I responsible for your car and the hidden items in your car?
Sure.
Absolutely. And you got no idea what I keep in my car. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's different if your car caught a light because your garage caught a light and I set to light some of my house and your car happened to catch a light and you said there are things in the car, because it's not intentional. The minute it's your own force, it's intentional. Therefore, that's why Rav Yochanan says you are liable even for hidden things. Okay, but then it poses a problem. What's the problem? Is then why are you not liable for exposed things? Why are you not liable for exposed things? Because if you deem a fire to be your force or your arrows, you're liable for exposed things, which we agree that Rav Yochanan says that you're liable for. So we don't have a problem there, except in one situation. And that situation is as follows, is that I create a fire in my property. Okay, this is where Michael got confused between a fire being deemed one's property or responsibility versus a fire caused in one's property. They're two separate things. So if there's a fire that I create in my property and it extends beyond my property, Rav Yochanan says you're not responsible. And the reason he says you're not responsible is the fire damage would have stopped at my wall. Okay? It would have stopped. And therefore, if the fire exceeds that because the wall happens to fall down unrelated to the fire, it's no longer my realm of responsibility. And in that particular example, he wouldn't obligate payment for hidden things. Okay? But then the question is, and Rav Yochanan, well, then how would he obligate payment for exposed things, right? Because it's also not my responsibility. So in other words, let's take a look at Reish Lakish here. Let's take a look at Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said it's your property and it's your obligation to watch it. So if your fire causes damage in anybody's property, whether it starts off in your home, let's use the word home instead of property, and goes to somebody else's home, you're responsible for your fire because it's your possession. Rav Yochanan would turn around and say, it's your force that caused it. So up until the point of your property, where there is fencing or whatever, it's deemed to be your force. But anything beyond the fence is not, because you have a barrier. So it's the equivalent of me playing racquetball against a wall, okay? And that wall was up. And suddenly when I'm hitting a tennis racket and using the wall as a volleyball so the ball can bounce back and me to hit it again with a tennis racket, it's fine. And then say I'm taking a shot at that and the wall fell down, not related to what I was doing, and then smashed through the neighbor's glass. I'm not responsible, because by all intents and purposes, that was an accident.
I think
That
what you're
wasn't
saying,
my
Damon, is that there's a limitation when you talk about
yes,
force, and
yes,
there's a barrier in the way. There's a limitation to
yes,
your force. There's a
yes,
limitation. There's a barrier that's been set up to limit your
yes,
force. So therefore, you cannot be held responsible for anything beyond that.
correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. You said it. You said it more succinctly. That's exactly it. So there's a limitation. The only time that limitation doesn't apply is that when you had ample opportunity to fix that wall and you didn't, then that's deemed negligence. That limitation
Right.
doesn't
That
apply.
makes sense. Okay, I got it. That's what I wanted to ask you yesterday.
Yeah.
I understand
So
now. Thanks.
that wall is a limitation, but that does leave a problem. What problem does that leave? Is that then why are you responsible, according to Rav Yochanan, for exposed things? If Rav Yochanan saying the wall is a limitation,
Yeah, yeah.
that wall fell down in an accident, and therefore, because it fell down in an accident, not because it was consumed by the fire, that's why you're not responsible in that case for hidden things. Then why are you not responsible for exposed things? Because all the rabbis agree you're responsible for exposed things if the fire starts off in your home and burns part of your home and your neighbor's home. There's a problem there, because then you can't say anymore that it's just a case of the fire being deemed that person's force, or that or it was causative.
Then this must be the person's property.
Correct. And at that point,
Yeah.
we say, exactly. At that point, we say, Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan agree as a baseline that the fire is your responsibility, your property. And just like you'd have to look after your ox, you look after your fire. And if it gets out of hand, you're responsible for that damage. Both agree with that. The only thing of it, in addition to that, Rav Yochanan deems it's your arrows, it's your force. And since it's your arrows and your force, he obligates for that in addition to being deemed your property. Does that make
Right.
sense? They both agree with the fact that it's your responsibility, being deemed your property. It's just that Rav Yochanan said, in addition, you've got further obligations in terms of responsibility, in that it's deemed your force, that you're responsible even for indirect damage. So, for example, it goes as far as saying that if I tied up a slave or a Canaan slave, that instead of paying 30 silver shekels for damage that my property caused to the slave, in other words, where you pay the owner of the slave 30 silver shekels for the death if your bull, which has a mind of its own, kills a Canaanite slave, you pay the owner 30 silver shekels. Rav Yochanan says that's not good enough. In this particular case, it's your force. You set the blaze alight to a haystack of a tied slave, and therefore you are responsible for murder. And since you're responsible for murder, you get the death penalty. So kim lebedi rabamine, which means you don't pay the financial portion at all, because one's liable to death. So he holds one's arrows, makes him directly responsible for the person's death, because he set the process in motion. It's not just that he has to look after his property. Where else does the implication play out? In terms of the damages you pay. So Gavin, according to Reish Lakish, you only pay for nezek shalom, the actual full damages. But according to Rav Yochanan, in addition to paying for nezek shalom, the actual damage, you pay for additional things. You pay for the medical bills. You pay for the convalescing, the healing. You pay for the tsar. You pay for the pain. So in other words, just like person A, hits person B, you pay for these additional things because it's direct damage, like Marve, where the man hitting a man. So too, according to Rav Yochanan, is that if your fire caused damage to a person because you set a haystack alight and it really ruined the person's life, in addition to paying the actual damage, what do you mean the actual damage? It means the actual bodily damage that the fire caused. All these additional payments you make, including the ability that the person no longer has of what their previous job title was compared to now, their financial losses and what they'd be worth, etc. All of these additional payments that you pay as if person A hit person B, you pay because it's deemed your force, your arrows, and therefore Rav Yochanan obligates in these other payments, whereas Reish Lakish says you only have to pay as though you're properly damaged for the fire you caused in terms of actual damage. Does that make sense, guys, in terms of the practical application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Listen, I hope this has been a lot clearer.
Yeah, that has been. Thanks.
And I appreciate your term. That term that Michael used was great, where he said there's a statute of limitations beyond your property boundary. If there was a war that should have been there, unless it blew off on a freak accident, would have created a fire barrier to stop you being responsible if it was the neighbor's property. In that particular case, you're not. So Rav Yochanan, just on that point, would say you're not responsible from the point of it being deemed your arrows if it was an unavoidable mishap. In other words, the two, it just happened to fall down the wall as that flame went, or you busy throwing something against the wall and playing bouncy and the wall fell and then it hit somebody's glass, then you're not responsible. But you are responsible under it being deemed your property. And since it's your property, you have an obligation to make sure you look after it and prevent that damage. So that statute of limitations only works according to saying if it is your force, but not according to saying if it is your property. Okay. Guys, I hope today was a lot clearer.
Yeah.
Great, Dan. That is great. Thank you.
Do you have
Thank
any
you so
questions,
much.
Gav?
No, I'm good. It was covered well by everybody, and there was good questions today as well.
All right. Shame
From Michael
after
and everybody else.
I'm broken. Yeah, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'll listen to the share again
All right, I'm sorry.
when I upload it. Okay, mate. Guys, have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos, guys.
Yeah,
Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody have a good
Yeah.
Shabbos.
Yeah.
Ciao,
All right,
bye.
thank-
All right.
All right. Cheers, guys.